Hello and welcome to the Gambling Files podcast. I'm one of your hosts, John Bruford, joined by your other host, Fintan Costello. Fintan, hello.
Hello, John.
Hi. So I'm a little poorly. I'm very tired, and I've only got a cold, but I'm suffering a little bit.
You can hear it in your voice.
Yeah, I don't feel I've got a lot to offer the world today.
That's okay. My endorphins are flowing, so I'm in a good mood. So
Why are endorphins flowing, Fintan? Are you
well,
still working with your fitness coach?
no, I paused him. So I've done no exercise. I've no proper exercise the last probably 8 weeks. A little bit of running, but nothing. Just a quick jog or something. Because I was really swamped with moving house and getting the apartment sorted and stuff before we moved. And it was always like I had to be there at like 8 o'clock to let somebody in, and then there at 10 o'clock that night because somebody else was showing up or some shit like that. So I just completely overwhelmed. But we've moved in now. I had a lovely Sunday afternoon in the sauna. Fucking great. Endorphins flowing. Planned out my week. Got a shitload of stuff done this morning. Started exercise. So my new thing is I've signed up for a bunch of obstacle course races. Because last year I was doing a lot of long distance running for my 100k thing, but I lost a ton of strength. So I want to do a mix of running and strength, and an obstacle course race is an easy one to do for that. So I've kind of got a training plan for that now. Started this morning. Yeah, it's good. I'm in a good place.
Nice. I'm a little bit tired after hearing you describe that, though, so I might have a little nap.
That's okay. So the big race I'm signed up for is I've signed up for a bunch of them because there's tons in the Netherlands. But I'm doing one in I think October where it's a 24-hour race, and I've never done a 24-hour race before, so I'm quite excited. So basically, it's how many laps of this obstacle course can you do in 24 hours, which is just I don't know. It just gets the juices flowing. I'm quite excited about it.
Yeah, it does sound good.
Yeah.
Tiring, but good.
Yeah. So
Are you good at napping?
Oh, mate, I'm a champion napper. I can nap anywhere. 45-minute power nap. Don't even need to set a clock. Brilliant.
I can, and this is apparently extremely difficult, but I can sleep standing up.
That would be extreme. Do you have to like lean your head against the wall or something? Or
I didn't. I just stood and slept.
That's very impressive.
Apparently, I was reading about it, and apparently you have to be on the point of total exhaustion.
Well,
but that wasn't the case. I was just shit-faced and tired.
What can happen though is when you're super tired, like every time you blink, like let's say you've stayed awake
micro
for
sleeps
or something, you do every blink is like a little sleep.
Wow.
So I did a ton of research for this for a backyard ultra, which is like a last man standing type race. The really competitive ones going for like 4 or 5 days. But the guys have a whole system for like just getting like a 5-minute nap every hour type of thing, or 10 minutes.
I went to the cinema the other day.
What'd you see?
I saw a movie called Perfect Days, which it's considerably more engaging than I'm about to make it sound. It's about a Japanese toilet cleaner in Tokyo.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful little film. It really is. But me being me, and I was coming on with my cold symptoms and all that jazz. I nodded off in the film. But the film being the way that it is, I really didn't miss anything because it's quite a cyclical sort of thing. It's a really, really gorgeous film. And we came out and I was with Liz. And Liz said, "What do you think of that?" I said, I really, really enjoyed it. And she's like, "Well, I thought it was 20 minutes too long." I'm like, "No, I thought it was just right."
Right. Let's
Yeah.
thank our sponsors for making this happen.
Let's thank our sponsors. Thank you, sponsors. Our sponsors are,
The
in no
mighty
particular
Clarion
order.
Game.
Alphabetical order, that is, isn't it?
Yeah. Clarion
Mighty
Gaming.
Clarion Gaming. Mighty Clarion.
Yeah. Barcelona 2025.
Woo.
Book tickets. It's happening. It's happening. And then we got the IGB event in Amsterdam this summer. Which is,
it's going to be big.
My backyard. Give me a shout if you're in town.
But is it going to be the last one in Amsterdam, isn't it? Switching to London in 25.
It is, yeah.
So maybe it's going to be a big blowout.
Maybe the gambling files will have a boat. Who knows? Who knows?
Well, let's wait and see. But I'm feeling confident on which way that's going to fall.
It can be. Oh, mate, it's so easy to organise. It's no big deal.
Are there any other sponsors you'd like to mention?
I would like to mention Optimove.
Oh, they sound nice.
The iGaming industry's #1 CRM software. It's brilliant. If you're an operator and you're not using Optimove, just go get the demo. I don't care what other systems you're using, what tools you're doing, how great your team is, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure it's all great. Just go get the demo. Get the demo, see how it works, see what it can do with your data, and see how it can make your life so much easier. It's every time I look at it and the stuff that they're doing and the clever things that they're doing, it's just, if I was an operator, I would just like immediately install it. But go get the demo, see for yourself.
It is a no-brainer.
It's such a no-brainer. You could run the size of the business you could run with that tool, and without having to add headcount is just phenomenal.
So, Fintan,
I can see why they are there. Yes.
We haven't talked about our guest on the episode, though.
We have the absolutely fascinating Dr. Alan Hardacre.
PhD.
PhD. Yeah, not that doctor, but yeah, I would definitely like jump in. I'm a doctor. Let's go. It's he is co-founder. He's a public affairs consultant, and he is co-founder of Advocacy Strategy and Advocacy Academy. And we have a fascinating conversation about public affairs and lobbying and influencing legislation and everything in and around that. Dr. Hardacre is clearly an expert. He's got a lot of industry experience, and it was a fascinating. There's a lot I need to go away and process after this conversation. It was really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
When Fintan says we had a conversation, he means he and Alan, because in my present weakened state, I was not really able to participate very fully. So
I wasn't expecting you to show up. I thought you were off sick, so I wasn't expecting.
No, I thought I'd just be here to support you.
Thanks, man.
And because the amount of times I've taken the piss out of you for not turning up, that I can't not be here. It gives you fuel.
You're allowed to be sick.
No, I'm self-employed. Not allowed to be sick. Not allowed to get anything wrong. Anyway. Right. Alan Hardacre, public affairs consultant.
Enjoy.
We're joined by, I don't know, first only, it's anybody's guess, guest this week. Fintan and I are lucky enough to be joined by the highly recommended Alan Hardacre of the grandly named Advocacy Strategy Organization. He's a public affairs consultant with a PhD in international relations. Nothing to do with Bill Clinton, he tells me. Alan, welcome.
Good. Thank you very much. It's nice to be with you guys.
Well, let's reserve judgment on that for a little bit. Because, you know what I mean? We've got a reputation to uphold. So Alan came recommended from Dr. Maris Catania.
It's also Dr. Alan. So for throwing titles out, I think we need to use the right titles for everybody.
Have you ever thought about getting a doctorate, Fintan? There's a lot of them around.
I thought about it. I really did. I thought about because I really wanted to do a master's as well, and then it's just like it's such a time commitment. It's such a time commitment. It's you know, I've huge respect for anybody who can go to a PhD. Like it must have been so like how many years? 4 years? What is it, 3-4 years longer?
Yeah, if you're funded and full time, it's 3 or 4 years. If you go part time because you don't get funding, it can be up to 8 to 10 years.
8 to 10 years.
Mm.
Jeez, did you went part time?
I was part time. It took me eight, nearly 9 years.
How did you, if you don't mind me asking, like how do you, because you've got to juggle it between, I'm guessing you've got a family or something at home.
So at the time, it was a job. So it was juggling between my job, my life, which took a bit of a backseat because basically you work and then you go home.
Yeah.
And then actually, there's a second disadvantage I discovered in hindsight to doing a part-time PhD is that when you finish and you try to get a job in academia, they tell you that you're actually not an academic because you were not part of the academic circuit. You didn't go to all the conferences, you weren't on the inside. And when you go to a company, they say, well, you've got a PhD, so you're an academic. So I discovered that the part-time route landed me in no man's land.
That's ridiculous. I didn't realize there'd be, but surely it's the best about, like, it's twice as hard, 3 times as hard because you've held down a full-time job and you've studied.
I guess at the end of the day, for me, I guess it depends what you were doing the PhD for. If you were doing the PhD because you fully wanted to become an academic, then you might find yourself with a bit of a problem. In my case, that wasn't the case. So I started something that when you're 6 years into it, you don't want to let it go. So you just want to finish the
You're
damn
pot
thing.
committed at that point.
Exactly. It's like, there's a sunken cost here, and I need to get to the end.
Fintan, I think it's fair to say he's just described every marathon I've done, certainly.
I thought you were going to say marriage.
Wow. Yeah, I certainly ended those. No, just that whole, well, I've done fucking 18 miles now.
And we're nearly there. We might as well get it finished.
I'll do the last 8.
That's yeah, it's such, because you've effectively got to give up your life because all your free time has to go into your research.
Yeah, it just, honestly, it was perhaps, I didn't work on my PhD every non-working hour, but it was like a millstone around my neck because basically if I wasn't doing it, I was feeling guilty that I should be doing it. Yes, it was more a psychological and emotional challenge than it was actually an intellectual one at the end.
which is part of it, right? That's the, it's the
part
hazing.
of the skills you get, right? Part of the skills that a PhD gives you that are perhaps maybe underappreciated.
I can think about a small thing for a very long period of time.
Exactly.
Love it. Okay, so public affairs. What is public affairs and what is it that you actually do?
Right. So public affairs, at least in my world, is how you structure and organize your relationships with governments. Okay, so that can be proactively or reactively. So reactive public affairs in the sense that the government proposed a new law last week, and you as anybody, as an NGO, as a company, as a trade association, you have something that you want to convey in relation to that law. You want to put a point across. You want to actually influence what that's going to be. Or proactively, as you're sitting down and you're thinking, okay, there's a gap in the law here, or there's something that I would like to create as a law, and therefore I'm going to take the proposal forward and make it. So it's ultimately it's about the law at the end of the day, and it's all of the way that an organization manages that process. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. And obviously, being the gambling industry, there's tons of examples in lots of countries. Okay, so that right. Let me go back a step then.
Yep.
What's the journey to being a public affair? Like, do you wake up one day and go, you know what I want to do? Like, what does that journey look like, and what are the types of people that typically end up doing kind of public affairs work?
So I think the answer is a little bit different country by country, actually, Fintan. So I think in a European context, public affairs is not particularly well understood. So I did European studies at university. I travelled around the world. I did a little bit of time working for the UN, and then, if I'm honest with you, I fell into lobbying more by accident than by design. And then over the years in lobbying, I've discovered things that I like or prefer more than others because I didn't really know about it before. So I think a lot of people end up in it perhaps somewhat more by accident than by design. There are very few dedicated courses on public affairs. I think maybe there's 3 or 4 universities around Europe now that have dedicated master's programs for public affairs professionals. So
Okay.
a lot of people come into the world of public affairs with a law degree, a language degree. You could even come in with a gardening degree. I think it's really quite an open field as long as you've got certain attributes that you can use. It was slightly different to, for example, say the US, where the US it's a much more recognized profession. There is much more pathways into public affairs. And then if you go outside Europe, it's barely even understood at all. So it's an activity that will be done mostly by lawyers and law firms.
Got it. Okay. Which makes sense, because even if we just look at our guests, we've got quite a lot of law firms that come on, and they're definitely having discussions with parliamentarians or regulators or these kind of things.
If you move that, I can completely get that, because my experience of the online gambling industry is that indeed they are very legally equipped, they're very lawyer heavy, and they are very public affairs light.
So what's the difference?
So, I mean, I guess it depends. If you have a regulatory department, so you have a regulatory department, maybe a legal department, maybe a public affairs department. The way I would see that is, your more regulatory compliance is dealing with what does the law say, how do we comply, actually, how do we make this work in a legally viable way?
Where's the loophole is the other question.
Or alternatively, where are the loopholes and where are the things, that this competitive advantage that we can or can't do? Exactly.
How close to the line can we get is the other question.
Or how far beyond the line can we push before it becomes a problem? Yeah? So maybe that's the compliance. The legal department, then, it depends company by company, right? But then I guess the legal department is, of course, dealing with the slew of legal problems that come up from, we put out a marketing campaign and we used the Olympics logo because nobody realized that was actually trademarked, and now we're in trouble and we're being sued. Or we decided to use Haaland in one of our adverts, not knowing that maybe there were some image rights that we had to cross here. So there is an ongoing body of litigation and ongoing court cases especially in the online gambling space, where there's a lot of litigation. So there it's more technically purely legal. And then the public affairs is more about shaping the environment with the governments, less the regulator, right? But also the regulator, with regard to the laws that are going to govern online gambling. And when I say online gambling, it can be anything, right? That could be pharmaceutical, tobacco. It's the same model.
It's the same model. Okay, so it's more about influencing the decision makers.
Yes. So it's like, compliance department is working with the law that they get. A lawyer is litigating some aspect of the law that exists. Public affairs department is trying to shape the laws that you're going to get or change the laws that you already have.
Understood. Okay, that makes perfect. And based on what you're saying, then you can definitely see. I see exactly what you're saying. There's big compliance departments, big legal departments, but not a lot going on in the public affairs space. If there is, it's typically done through like a body.
Yeah, there are a number of trade associations. So across all of the world, Europe no different. Nearly all countries have an online gambling trade association, or they have some hybrid trade association that maybe has some online and some offline. But there is at least some form of representation of interest. But again, what's important, Fintan, is the people who are then, say, for example, the board of that association who are driving the agenda, they're either CEOs or lawyers, mostly.
Or, sorry, I was going to make a joke about one of them. Sorry, it's okay.
Please do.
Right. Or chairman.
Or wankers. That's going to say.
Same difference.
But I think the challenge I see with, say, some of these organizations, and I'll pick on. Actually, I'm not sure if do you work with any of them? Can I
At the
mention
moment,
names?
no, I don't.
Okay, I'm not going to
I
put.
used to consult for Kindred, but I don't work with any of them now.
Okay. So the BGC in the UK, I think, has done a pretty rough job in a lot of ways, and I think there's been a lot of mistakes and a lot of very simple PR gaffes at a
Yes.
very basic level. And I think one of the challenges of an organization like that is it's a big tent, and you've got everybody in the tent.
Mm.
So if you're an organization, or you're a particular aspect of that or particular aspect of the industry, effectively you've got advocacy on a committee level, and fucking good luck, right?
Yeah, look,
So
trade associations are often the classical example of the committee who are tasked with designing a horse, and every time they will come out with a camel, right? That is, it's just the nature of trade associations. And I guess the thing in the online gambling space that I think that I have found is important to note here is it's who's in that association. So do you have state incumbents? Do you have online operators with the offline, with the online? Sorry. Or alternatively, if you have only online, are you just the big 4 or 5 players, or are you the entire tail of small operators? Because that, yes, all of those are going to lead to very different versions of a camel.
And it's also I think the FOMO of like I've seen it personally from so my background is the affiliate space.
Yeah.
And there's been in the UK there's a small affiliate association, and there's one in the US as well. And it's typically the bigger affiliates can afford and to participate and stuff. But anybody who's not in the group just assumes they're getting done over, and this is going to be bad for them. And
Fintan, there is another side. I agree with you. There is one aspect of some organisations who might think, "My God, we need to pay to get on the inside just to make sure." They also, a lot of associations also suffer from free rider problems, right? Which is, look, they're out there, they're chasing this bit of law, they're doing that. They're going to do it if I pay or not. So I'll save my money. I'll spend that on some more marketing, and I'll let them get on with it.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. And you can see that, like in America right now, you can absolutely see that. So we understand. So basically, kind of what it feels like is that the travel of direction then is like if I'm a decent sized organization, like I need to be looking at public affairs as part of my team. It strikes me as an industry where, because obviously, like coming from the outside in, like I've had very little experience of this. There's a bit of a reputation of lobbyists, and I'll be honest, you don't strike me as the strip club and the steak and the whiskey kind of lobbyist. Maybe I've caught you completely wrong, but it doesn't feel the vibe I'm getting.
It might be an insult. I'm not sure.
I'm not. No, actually not. But there's a reputation.
Sure.
There's a perceived kind of boogeyman.
Absolutely.
Oh, the lobbyists are doing it, and all this kind of stuff.
Yep.
I think the reality is always, not like that at all, or typically it's somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
But it strikes me and particularly as you go around the world, where there's a lot of snake oil salesmen.
Yes.
Oh, I'll get you my cousin's this, and I'll get you access to that, and I used to work for so and so, and I've got the inside track. And how do you identify the legit one? I don't know. Or what are the questions you would ask to identify, like, is this person legit, or am I just burning cash?
It's funny. I was just having a conversation with somebody about what we were terming sort of old-fashioned lobbying, which is a little bit like the film Thank You for Smoking, which is a little bit more, it's Rolodex lobbying. It's what you say. It's, I'm employed as a lobbyist because I've got this Rolodex of contacts. Okay, look, for me, that's all very well and good, and it's interesting. But I think almost more important, and the questions I will be asking is just asking about how do they structure and organize their public affairs work? What are the steps they go through? How do they envisage getting from here to where they want to go? So I think, because for me, it's public affairs is a structured and organized way of thinking and doing things to give yourself the maximum chances of success. And part of that is connections. But the key thing I'm saying there is it's part of it. It's not the only thing. Just because I've got a Rolodex doesn't mean I'm going to be a good lobbyist. It doesn't work like that.
Okay. And but it strikes me though as it could be one of the, like, if we think of it like a job interview, right? It could be one of those job interviews where I can say all the rights. Oh, I'm super structured and I'm going to organize your shit and I'm going to do this and do that. And we're going to create these white papers and we're going to get it in front of the right people and we'll organize a lunch and blah, 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 blah. And it's going to sound great. And it's really easy to say the right stuff. How would you go about reference checking somebody? Or like, how do you really kind of say, okay, well, what's the actual substance here? And can we get past the words? Because I would guess, given the role, they're good at chat, right?
Yeah, I mean, mostly, again, it's not always the case, oddly enough. But yeah, you would expect that a lobbyist, for the most part, would be an extrovert. Yeah, someone who is comfortable going out. But I guess in today's world, a lot of lobbying is done by a team of people, right? So, so if I take an example of a US organization, they will have someone who's running their US lobbying operation. They will have people at federal level going out. They will have people at state level going out. So that there you need your extrovert, your communicators who can and maybe the people who have got connections. Behind that, you will have people who are running social media channels. You will have people who are organizing events. You will have people who are writing the position papers and creating, the things that the lobbyist needs to work with to convince a stakeholder, whatever that is, whether that's an infographic, whether that is a video, whether that's research. So there's many different components to the life of a lobbying team. And I think this is the point then, Fintan, is because at a certain point that all rolls into one if you're just one person as the lobbyist.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's how I think you can ask about this and you can push people on, classical giving you examples, telling you how they've done that in a previous life. Beyond that, I think, yes, if you're going to call up for references, probably good to call actually policymakers that they say they've interacted with, as opposed to just previous companies. You interacted with this lobbyist. What was your experience? Were they positive? Did they bring something to the table? Did they make your life easier, or were they just a pain in the ass? How did they come across? So I guess different ways, but I guess that's a problem of many interview processes, right? It's like playing a lottery. How do you really know you're getting the right person?
It is buying, it's buying a big lottery ticket.
Can that really be any different in marketing, right? Where people are also, I suspect, creatively outgoing. It must be the same.
It's the exact same, which is why it's always a two-stage process where there's a project of here's a problem to solve. Come back to me with your thoughts. Yeah, and you'll quite quickly unpack the thing. The project never fails. Yeah. And we'll get to the gambling industry in a sec. So just interested in the nuts and bolts. So if we look at at what size of an organization does it make sense? Because you can see, there's the Googles and the Facebooks, and they've got armies of people doing all their stuff. And if we look at the gambling industry, the big guys clearly got teams of people and are engaging stuff. But at what point do you think it makes sense? Like, what size of organization or what kind of challenges where, like, look, guys, investing in this makes sense?
So I guess it's there are a number of parameters that maybe cut across the size of the organization, right? So the size is one component of the thinking. Okay, so are you an operator who is only based in Romania, for example, right? That's your market. So, if there's a law comes out in Romania, you're disproportionately impacted. What market share do you have? Do you have 5%, 50% of that Romanian market? So it's kind of where you're operating. The second thing is, what challenges, what is happening in your external environment? If it's all very quiet and happy and everybody's getting along well, then maybe this isn't even, it's a bit of a non-issue for you. But I don't know, maybe you have got 30% market share in Romania by running extravagant social media campaigns and billboarding next to schools. Maybe that's been fantastic for your business. And suddenly you hear somewhere that there's a law that's going to ban social media and billboarding, in which case, okay, it maybe doesn't require a permanent public affairs function, but at least I need to do something in the short term. So I think it's often it'll be slightly driven by your size, driven by what's happening, and also lastly driven by, what type of an online gambling company are you? And I'm talking about the online gambling industry here quite more specifically, in the sense that, is your objective to make as much money as fast as humanly possible with a view to being sold, in which case you don't want to dilute any sales and marketing spend, or are you actually in this for the longer term, where, a marketing ban that's passed this year that comes into force in 2 years, if you're a more short-term operator, you don't really care about that. That's a long enough horizon to knock yourself out. Whereas if you aspire to having customers beyond the next 2 years, you're interested in this. So I guess that can be down to your vision. That can simply also, Fintan, be down to the CEO and the management team and their view of the world, right? So it's quite a lot of factors I think can combine in different combinations to drive an organization to say, right, actually now we need to, and it's mostly driven by risk and crisis, as opposed to being driven by a company sitting down and thinking, we want to proactively get hold of this. It's mostly risk and crisis driven.
Which is classic gambling industry approach. Like, an online gambling firm thinking 2 years down the road is pretty unique.
But nearly all industries, Fintan, it's not unique to the online gambling industry.
Oh, really? Okay.
No.
Maybe I'm too hard on them.
As we've talked about it, right, sort of reacting to something that's happened or proactively going out to hit, how much lobbying do you think is proactive?
I would say 5%.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that is probably an optimistic outlook. And that tends to be the preserve of two very different types of people. So proactive lobbying for change is the reserve of A, big companies who have resource, and B, NGOs.
And how much of that, though, is a reflection of the companies versus a reflection of news cycle driven politicians?
Yeah. So look, so now it's so yes, what is driving regulatory change in today's world is different to what was driving. When I say regulatory, I mean legal, the change of the laws, right? So I don't get lost in the terminology here. What's driving governments to change the laws around online gambling, of course, is completely different now to what it was 5-6 years ago. We're in a very social media clickbait, news disseminates very quickly across borders as well. So yes, I think there's a lot of, and all industries feel this, right? All industries, not just online gambling. It is very, very difficult now. There's so much noise, much of it not positive, right? So yes, how much of that's going to be taken seriously? What's going to be picked up? Yes,
which is the thing, because if you are one of these CEOs who's like trying to think the next 5-10 years down the road, but actually the politician only cares about today's headlines and the whatever's trending on Twitter, under whatever his brief is, it can be, it's two very different conversations, and unless it's solving today's problems.
So now you're heading towards one of my biggest bugbears. Okay, I have so many clients who tell me, we want evidence-based policy making. We want science-based, evidence-based decisions from the government. I can only but ask my clients, have you fallen asleep for the last 30 years? Where in the world do you think there is evidence, science-based decision making objectively happening today? It's just, we're in such a political, news-driven cycle that, as you say, Fintan, it's just, politicians get bombarded with all sorts of information, probably negative, driven by NGOs, for example, who are trying to raise a problem amongst other problems to the attention of a policymaker who's going to pick it up. And then what they're going to do is they are then going to take a look themselves. And if they actually see what those NGOs or the other campaigners are telling them, then they're going to think, actually, you know what, maybe there is a problem here. And the problem is that once they bite, it just keeps going. And we see this in online gambling.
In what way?
So I think the thing that draws the attention of most regulators, most politicians to online gambling is often marketing and advertising. Okay, of which there are so many complaints about various types of what I would call carpet bombing. Yeah, so
Guilty.
we will carpet bomb this sporting event. We will carpet bomb this train station, and this just basically is like sort of or we will be very much there's a compliance line. We'll be as far out as possible to see how much we can get away with, and at some point somebody's going to pick this up, and that then draws attention to the online gambling industry. First of all, the marketing and advertising, but as they get into it, then they raise other issues that they want to look at. And before you know it, they're starting to look at, okay, so what actually is the spin speed of autospin? Isn't that too fast? So it doesn't take long to move from here into your actual, your presentation and the marketing of what you do to actually looking behind the engine of how you do it.
So, and I suppose the challenge there is, like, I've seen in some countries where the regulators come out and say, has asked for restrained marketing.
Exactly.
But it's a classic like tragedy of the commons, where if you're the one who's restrained and none of your competitors are,
exactly,
then you've lost market share and marketing is going to get banned. So you might as well just ignore it and crack on.
Yeah, this is it. This is the absolute discussion that you have, and this is where it gets really problem. And this is where I think it's every industry has this. Online gambling, as far as I can observe, really has a problem with this, in the sense that maybe the 4 or 5 big operators are willing to sign up to a voluntary code of conduct that shows restraint. The smaller operators are not, and in fact, the smaller operators are delighted if the big guys do, because that's a free hit for them. And we've seen this a couple of times. I certainly saw this a couple of times. One of them was most notably where in the Netherlands, all members of the trade association were in negotiations with the government about how to self-regulate, and they actually held themselves to certain restrictions. So there was a couple of companies in the Netherlands who were not members of the trade association who basically had free reign.
They bought all the bus. I live in Amsterdam. They bought all the bus shelters. They did all the out-of-home advertising.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it doesn't take long. And when I say it doesn't take long, I mean it takes about the space of about 3 days before other companies then start saying, "Whoa, hang on a minute. Yeah. These guys have got open space." If that continues for another few days, I am also going back into advertising that space.
Yeah. Yeah, but they ended up buying all the space. Yes. Yeah, it was a crazy situation.
A market share can shift very quickly in those cases, right? So this is where I think governments don't quite understand the obligations that are on them, and sometimes I think they struggle to understand how you can properly regulate a competitive industry. You can't just say to a group of an industry, right? We want to hold you guys responsible. We're running a business. What we want you to do is come in and just hit everybody at the same time with the same uniform law, so that we know that we want to know that if we're not doing it, nobody else is doing it.
Yeah. And I think in my view, there's, if you look at, say, the UK or Sweden as 2 good examples where the regulator's been a bit vague on certain things, and it's up to the operator to decide. And then in Sweden, it's a very good example of, like, you find out the rules in court when they give you a big fine.
Yes.
But I think you're putting it in a very good way. In a competitive industry, you have to be very specific.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're going to get a range of outcomes which are unintended.
I've often come across the frustration of regulators. Okay, in the sense that why are the companies looking to exploit these loopholes? It's like, well, I have no sympathy for you, Mr. Regulator or Mrs. Regulator, because you have created a bit of a grey zone here. What do you expect to happen? Do you think everyone's going to take the most responsible view of what you've given them? I don't think so. Everybody's going to take the complete opposite view. How far can I push? What could I possibly get away with or interpret as being within this grey zone? And I'm going to do it. Or alternatively, I saw them doing it, so I'm going to do the same thing. Yes. Which that unfortunately leads to problems between the industry and the regulator at that point.
Yeah, there's definitely a mismatch. But you've explained it. It's the first time I've been, okay, actually, I can see why it happened. I can understand it now better. So the next question then is, what does engagement with a politician look like? Obviously, I made the joke about strip clubs and steaks. What's the reality? Like, what does an engagement look like?
Love the way that you come back in here and say, obviously, I made a joke about that. That definitely doesn't happen.
Hoping that that's what the answer is going to be, right?
Oh, fucking, like, here's my CV. Let's go. Minister of Fun.
Yes, I will probably slightly disappoint you in my answer then, but I think, and again, I'm gonna draw you different pictures of what
Sure.
it looks like, because what it looks like in, say, again, I'll take Romania as an example, and I'll take the Netherlands as an example. Okay, so in Romania, where there is still an open discussion between the industry and regulators and politicians, so let's say recently the Romanian government published some laws. Okay, so they published some laws that were going to come into force that had all sorts of stuff about establishment, marketing. So you're impacted, you read it, and you're thinking, okay, what does this mean for me? What don't I like? What do I like? What could be competitively advantageous for me, maybe as a Romanian company versus an international company, right? So first thing is you assess what does this mean for me? What would I want or not want? Okay, and then at its pure and its most simple, you then just go out and think, okay, who are the committee who are going to decide this, right? Who's the committee? Who are the people who are going to vote on it? And ultimately, they're the people I need to talk to. Okay, so can I go directly to them? Do I know anybody? Do I have contacts? Can we then build up some sort of dialogue? And then usually when you're doing that, you need to give them something. And when I say give them something here, I'm not talking about a suitcase of cash. I'm talking about they need some facts, some evidence, some information that is going to be useful for them. Okay, so if you're saying I'm going in and I'm going to talk about, I think you should deal with this type of taxation system because it's more beneficial than that. They probably you need some analysis. Probably not your own analysis. You probably have to get it from one of the big accountancy firms. Okay, so now that's the nice scenario. Okay, the other scenario, let me flip to the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, gambling has gotten a reputation and has been denormalized as an industry to the point that most stakeholders do not actually want to meet directly with an online gambling lobbyist. So then you think, okay, so if I can't meet them directly, how am I going to do this? So then you have to think, okay, so is my trade association able to do it? Maybe I need to sponsor some research by somebody else, by a think tank, by a university that gets put out. You have to think about how you're going to do that indirectly. So I know who I need to talk to, but they won't actually physically talk to me. So how do I make them aware of my position indirectly? So just two different sort of extremes, if you like.
Got it. Okay, and you've used a really interesting phrase, denormalization. What does that mean?
So I guess I'm not sure I have a dictionary definition, but I think denormalization is I guess I'm going to separate it out to maybe denormalized in a political sense and denormalized for a consumer or a customer, right? And because I think they're both part of the same picture, but then I think one comes before the other. So what I mean by denormalized for me just generally means that there is a view and a perception that this is not a good thing. So it has been driven to the point that ultimately society is going to deem this a non-desirable activity. So, and that can be, the company can be denormalized, the people who work for it can be denormalized, but ultimately it's the activity itself that gets denormalized. And I think here, classical examples, tobacco, alcohol, I guess other sin products fit into this sort of denormalized agenda where ultimately, there is a not only are people lobbying for restrictions, but in doing so, they're actually questioning the entire existence of something itself. For tobacco lobbying, we're lobbying against, we want more restrictions, but ultimately the bigger question is, why does this even exist? So, and then I separate out between sort of politically denormalized as a first step to then something becoming sort of societally or customer denormalized. Because the first thing is if politicians get hold of this and start to really considerably view this actually something that we almost need to try and regulate out of existence, that is going to filter down and have an impact on customers who will start to then, I believe, have the same view.
Got it. Okay. So, and I think you've touched on tobacco and alcohol. So in my view, I think the gambling industry can learn a lot from other industries.
Yes.
I think probably alcohol is probably the better example than tobacco.
Yes.
And I think what alcohol has done with, sponsoring, say, music events and
Yeah.
just positioning themselves as fun and entertainment. They've done a really, really good job of that. And then the 0% beers, which just lets them bypass all advertising restrictions, is
Yes.
just utterly phenomenal.
Yes.
It's just great. And then the way they've done it with the logos and stuff is just like, it's perfect.
But also, sorry, Fintan, but also just another point. When you say the 0% alcohols, the other thing there is that actually there's actions, not just words. So they are actually putting a solution in the hands of customers and they're promoting it. I appreciate they get brand crossover, right? But they are actually nonetheless promoting a solution.
Like in my supermarket here, it's like there's an entire big section. Every brand has a 0% beer, and it's come a long way from the
Yes.
Caliber or whatever it was back in the day.
Yes.
So I suppose what based on your broad experience, like what lessons should the gambling industry learn from other industries, and where do you feel the weaknesses are? And let's also look at the positive. Like, where are the strengths?
Yeah, I think there's it feels to me, at least from a somewhat outside perspective, that the online gambling industry is really now hitting a pretty critical space for its future. Most countries are now looking at not if, but how exactly they are going to regulate this sector. And there seems to be consensus across most of those countries that marketing and advertising is going to be massively restricted. It also seems like there's a lot of attention being paid to how much you can gamble. So, how much can people actually deposit or lose or stake? So I think these are becoming quite existential for the industry. At the moment, marketing and advertising is fine. It's a market for me. It's at least it's a market share differentiator. The moment you get into how much you can stake, deposit, withdraw, play every month, rolling limits, that's becoming existential for everybody in the industry. Because that simply is going to hit your bottom line in a much more direct way. So I think there is a big need for more. There's two things, I guess, here, and one of them is a public affairs thing, and one of them is not a public affairs thing. Is my experience of the industry is that they're extremely good at talking, and they're extremely poor at actually doing. So they talk a good game, but they're not actually backing it up with the requisite actions to make a difference. And I think ultimately now we're at a point where unless you're backing this up with an initiative and action and you're actually demonstrating what it is you're going to say, like, I don't know, we've got a responsible marketing solution, or we believe that this is how it should be done, and that you're not actually living it and walking it, you're not going to get any credibility attached to it. So I think, unfortunately, we've already come quite a long way down this line. And as I say, it's the industry has two problems today. One is, what happens irresponsibly in one country is immediately known in another.
Yeah.
And the second is, it's and this has always been something that's very difficult to counter, but it is a real challenge, is often it's the same actors who are tarnishing the name of everybody. It's the small cowboys. Yeah?
Or the big cowboys.
Or the big cowboys.
Yeah, I was going to chip that very same thing in there.
They tend to point out the smaller cowboys, right? Okay, but
Sure.
yes, the point is it just takes one in one market to draw the whole industry into a mess.
Or if we take the UK as a market, there's like 300, 400, 500, 600 brands, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That one Guardian article by one out of the 300, let's just say there's 300, is just enough, and then everybody's done for. And it's always a horrific story, and it could have been avoided, and there's never an excuse for it.
Have you seen the Netflix documentary Big Vape?
I haven't yet, no.
Okay, it's a great example of how one company in the vaping space, Juul, managed to, I don't know, put the entire vaping industry back 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
I'll check it out.
It is an amazing story. Alan and I have some people in common because I used to do some work for e-cig intelligence and tobacco intelligence. And yeah, it is an amazing story. And the whole popcorn lung thing and all of the blame that was put on the industry about that and the deaths that came from vaping, like you heard much less about the fact that it was absolutely fuck all to do with any of the manufacturers or their electronic cigarette products when it was found out that it was an additive that some tiny dude had put in some cannabis e-liquid.
Oh, wow.
Nothing, but the damage to the industry was massive, and you still hear people
Because
saying it now.
yeah, the headlines were huge. It was like, another child has been hospitalized because of
Yeah, but
vapes or whatever. Right?
but you also see in that same story, and this is my main, the main. It's too late for this lesson, but there are other lessons after that. Is you see how Juul went after its marketing and advertising, and they focused on making themselves a young, hip lifestyle brand. What age consumers do you think that attracted?
Kids.
Exactly, and therein lies the end of that story, right? So and again, it's I'm not saying that online gambling is in the same boat, but its marketing and advertising has attracted so much attention that it is now in the sights of every regulator, and of course that is a serious problem. You do not want to be on the menu.
Yeah, it's yeah. So okay, so
Can I make a
so
slightly trivial point? Would you mind?
no, go for it.
Because I haven't chipped in much because I feel so poorly. It's just that the whole vaping cannabis juice thing. It's like I've always found that a little bit baffling, and I've likened it. And this might be really, really bad of me, but a friend of mine, whose name I'm not going to mention, a friend of his died of what is termed by coroners as autoerotic asphyxiation. And he was found by his mum in front of his computer with his trousers round his ankles. Right? And my mate just went, can you believe it? He died trying to have a better wank. And these popcorn lung people, they basically died trying to get stoned better, as opposed to taking the traditional routes. I mean, anyway, that was all I wanted to chip in there.
Thanks, mate.
Sorry, it was in my head. It had to come out.
Maybe to take your analogy back into safer territory, maybe there's something to be said then for what is the giant monster that the online gambling industry refers to all the time is, of course, the way to have the best, most seamless, fun, easy online gambling experience is, of course, to go to an illegal operator.
I was gonna talk about this because I think one of my challenges is, and again, I'm picking on the UK as the most relevant, but it applies to a lot of markets, is once you get a regulatory body that's lobbying for the industry, every proposal will be met with, this is going to actively encourage all of these consumers to go offshore to illegal bookmakers. And or particularly to the UK market, it's going to kill horse racing, is the other argument. If we can, how, and and there's sort of because it's super hard to measure, so it's a bit vague. It's very difficult. We talk about evidence policy making. There's there's a couple of Google searches and a Google Trends thing, and there's a WhatsApp Sting stuff in the Racing Post. But how, as a public affairs expert, how is it the right arguments? Should it be presented in a better way? Should it be where's, because there is, and here's the challenge, right? There's absolutely an offshore market that will happily take these customers, right? We've seen it in Sweden. We've seen Germany right now is a great example. They've destroyed an industry, and there's just a lot of people making a lot of money from offshore German gambling right now. So it's 100% a thing. Finding the line of where's the tipping point of encouraging people to go across. And even if you change nothing, there's still a bunch of people gambling with offshore brands and stuff anyway. The offshore guys, I don't think are actively targeting the UK because of regulation, and it's a bit of a hassle, and there's easier barrels to shoot fish in. But if we take the ignore the horse racing one, I think is a different matter. But if we take because I think that's more systematic to the horse racing industry. If we take the bogeyman of the offshore that gets trotted out all the time and overused. So I'm really loading this question up now. What are your thoughts? Let's just stop it there.
So my first thoughts are I would agree with you that the bogeyman they've made too much of it, but in perhaps they've been trying to make the best of a bad hand here. And what I mean by that is it's, as you say, it's quite difficult to quantify. It's quite faceless. It's kind of a big shapeless bogeyman that is quote unquote the illegal or the black market. Now it's super difficult to engage with that concept because it doesn't mean anything. So I think somehow the industry needs to, and also the other problem is, the regulator says, oh, we've got 89% channelization, and you say we did a study and we think we've got 52% channelization because of course we used a different methodology. So there's kind of apples and pears statistics going out here. So it feels to me like there's a couple of things. One's a longer term thing and the other's a shorter term thing. The longer term thing is there needs to be some agreement about a more effective methodology for measuring this. And I know there's quite a few, mostly consultants fishing for business out there with their methodology, but probably the solution is to stick quite a few of these bits together. But there needs to be a bit of a choice, and it needs to be done neither by the regulator and nor by the industry. It needs to be an independent somebody somewhere who's actually doing a better job of actually taking a measure of this. And then the second thing that I think the industry needs to do better is it needs to paint the human side of this better. It needs to be more detailed in its assessment of what the black market is. Here's an example of Bob who went to this operator and this happened. It needs to be humanized a bit more, the consequence and the impact. And I think I know that a lot of the addiction helplines, they've got great data on 70% of the people who come to us with problems come from the black market. Okay, so I think there needs to be a better job of ingraining the ability to humanize and build more of a narrative and a story around the data that we do have, as opposed to just saying the black market and you've lost 4 billion in revenue. I mean, that's not enough anymore.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Because again, because I suppose the challenge, because it's so faceless and anonymous, if you're sitting there as a politician, ultimately you're not going to lose any votes for being hard on the gambling industry.
Exactly.
And you're not going to win any votes for being easy on the gambling industry, right? Yep. In fact, it could be used against you at some future election by a competitor saying, oh, you voted yes on this, and look, here's the stats for problem gamblers in your constituency or something like that. Right? So in a way, it's a fraught, difficult, best case scenario. You just don't want them even thinking about you, rather than having to take a decision, because it's going to be a negative decision for the industry ultimately.
But it's exactly what you say. It's exactly that. And I think the Netherlands is a great example where this is really coming through. Right, politicians are just saying, no, I have constituency complaints about this. We saw this campaign, we saw that bus shelter. We need to do something. This has to be taken seriously. So you're not going to get anyone in the middle of that putting their hand up and saying, actually, I support the industry on this. No, nobody's going to do that. That's tantamount to political suicide. So some people will push it. Other people are just going to say, look, what have I got? I have nothing possible to gain from standing up in this discussion.
So what? Okay, so if we take that as the online argument, we look at land-based, so be it the horse racing industry or land-based casinos, which are both big employers. Yes. Does that change the narrative, or does that change the perspective from a politician?
So I think there's definitely a distinction being drawn, and I think there's a lot of good. Maris, back to the beginning of this conversation, would be a great person to, in the future, bring on some of her other friends from the world of academic research into the different risk profiles of offline and online gambling products. There's some great research going on. And I think that's a little bit the difference between a product that's available 24/7 in your pocket, seemingly limitless, controls much more difficult. It's not just sportsbook. If it was sportsbook, it's different, but it's not. It's a lot of online casino. So I think there's a growing recognition that there is a difference between the nature of what is being consumed here.
Okay.
And there are different problems that pop up with that. So it's not to say that your your offline establishments don't also have problems, because they do. But I think each has their own. And of course, everybody in this space is happily trying to point out everybody else's problems. Honestly, one of the biggest drivers of the regulation of the online space is probably driven by the brick and mortar offline actors, right? Because they're trying to protect their turf and look after themselves. And so, yes, of course, they've got skeletons in their closet, but the online industry just has a lot more.
It was equalization, I think, particularly if you look at the UK. Equalization was used a lot as the kind of the banner. Okay. I think that's all my questions. I'm just looking at my notes here. That was an education. Thank you so much.
But as you observe it, Fintan, as you take your special vantage point of the industry and you see all of this, the changes and the challenges coming through regulation and what the industry does, what's your view of where this is going?
So I've got two thoughts. One is this industry has come about from the grey market. So this was I'm just talking about the online industry. So the online gambling, since basically its inception, outside of the UK, has been an industry that's worked ahead of legislation.
Yeah.
And it's one of those fascinating places where you've got the concept of a grey market, which is it's not illegal, but it's also not legislated for, and it's in this lovely little kind of grey area. And if we look at all the big guys today, they've all come about through that grey period.
Yep.
The grey market's dead and has been dying for years. And it was back to your point of every country is slowly catching up and passing legislation. So you have a situation where you've got an industry that's going from grey to black or white.
Yeah.
White, and if we take like our economics textbook, it's the kind of classic market consolidation, big brands, big budgets, big databases, big smart teams doing great stuff, and the big guys are going to win. There'll be a space for small innovators. They'll get to a certain size and then they'll get gobbled up and yada yada yada. The black market, since the advent of crypto, is thriving. Like if you look at, say, online sports books targeting the US before Bitcoin, they were literally accepting Amazon vouchers as a deposit method.
Fantastic.
Right? And they had a whole instructions of like how you go buy your Amazon voucher, send them the code, right? Crypto basically saved the black market gambling industry. And you'll end up with both. Because there's a lot of countries where it's illegal or it's a thing, but there's clearly demand. It's not an industry you can prohibit. There's always going to be a demand for it to some degree, and crypto is the way to do that. So it'll be a very black and white world, and they'll be the two winners. Anybody still doing grey is on a death spiral type thing. The second part of it then is when I look at the regulated markets. If we look at the white markets, there's it's mostly tragedy of the commons, but there's a lack of bold action.
Yes.
And you've touched on this. There's a lack of getting in front of it. There's a lack of, right, we know we've got problems. Here's the 20 things we are doing as an industry across the board to get ahead of this. It's standardized. We're all working to the same checklist. We're all working to the same standards. We're auditing ourselves. There's third-party audit, like whatever it needs to be. That bold action, and basically just take the steam out of it.
Yeah.
Take the make it easy for a politician to go, okay, good enough, or a couple of tweaks and we're done. And you've touched on this really well. This has been a fascinating conversation of just like, let them move on to the next problem.
Yes, exactly.
So bold, big action. It's gonna hurt. You're gonna lose money, but so what? Get it done. Take the pain now, because anything that comes from legislation is going to be a lot worse or massively unpredictable, which is bad for shareholders. And I think if it was me making the decisions, that's what I'd be pushing for. And there's a lack of that. Part of it is just the sheer volume of companies and perspectives.
Yes.
And part of it is it's your classic kind of Christian Clayson, like innovator's dilemma. Well, like, we're making good money now. Why would I disrupt myself? I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got kids in private school. I want to get my pension topped up. I've got some share options vesting in the next 6 months. All I've got to do is hit that window. And so there's also that kind of, it's
perverse
very,
incentives.
yeah, it's very difficult to disrupt yourself.
Mm.
However, I think what could happen, or what could be a catalyst for this, is if one market gets very bad or gets very strict, then, like, for example, if you look at the US, which again culturally very, very different to any of the European markets, I think, and there's a smaller number of actors, so I think you might see potentially a bit more coordination there.
Yeah.
Based on lessons from other markets, but hard to tell. So yeah, me, it's, look, big bold action, get ahead of it.
Yeah.
Own the news cycle, not be owned by it.
Yes, and I think just is what I completely agree with what you say. Right, I think it's if they could get out there, and it's not. I don't think that the self-regulatory get out there works. I think there needs to be some action that demonstrates, but it's really it's somebody somewhere has to go to a regulator and say, right, this is the law we want for everybody, right? Because self-regulatory is not going to work. The industry is too immature. There's too big a tail for everybody to be even remotely interested in complying with that. Partially because, any law that you put out is going to have a compliance bar that's so high that half of the market can't actually reach it. Okay, so that's going to push that half of the market into your black space. But the white market, if they don't get ahead of it, they're constantly going to be following it, and it's just that it's just going to chew through, as we're seeing, right? And if you look at the Netherlands, is the best example of how this can go wrong, right? In terms of when they regulate, when they open up and have a regulated market, and it's taken them the space of 2 years to get to the point where there are now open discussions about whether they should actually ban this industry, right? And this is a regulator who's looking at everything: deposit limits, spin speed, game addictiveness. How do you deal with problem gamblers? The whole discussion is open.
Advertising to over 24s.
Exactly.
What was the other one? There's so it. And it took a really long time for them to pass the legislation and issue the first licenses.
Absolutely.
So it wasn't like this was a quick decision. It was a massive kick the ball down the road process. So you would have thought it would have been a bit more stable once it launched. Amazing. This has been fascinating. Thank you so much. I feel
Are you thanking me or Alan?
I'm thanking you for bringing Alan on, and I'm thanking Alan for being so fascinating.
I did do well, didn't I?
You really did well. So, Alan, you're co-founder of Advocacy Strategy, but you've also got another website, Advocacy Advisor. Can you touch briefly on that one?
Advocacy Academy is the second one.
Oh, sorry, Academy. Apologies, I got it wrong. Sorry. I know. Sorry.
The second one is, so the first one is Public Affairs Management Consulting, right? So that's how you set yourself up to be successful in public affairs. And the second one is an online learning and development platform for any lobbyists or wannabe lobbyists for all of the skills and tools you would need to do the job effectively.
I'm signing up. I'm sold. I love it. Brilliant. Fascinating. And people can find you on LinkedIn, Twitter, all the usual places?
People can find me in all the usual places. Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Super. As I said earlier, I'm very sorry I didn't contribute much today. I'm feeling a little poorly. For regular listeners, you'll be pleased to hear that. Yeah, Alan, thank you so much for coming on. So I spoke to Alan back in January for an article that I was putting together for IGB. Who knows if they'll print it? I certainly don't. And that was about normalization, and because I wanted to talk about fundamentally, I was talking about language and the normalization of acts with language as the origin of the point of normalization, if you like. And Alan was telling me about how normalization is essentially establishing a market, and I'd never thought of it like that. Bloody is, though. Turns out he's really clever. Crazy. So he's got a PhD. So PhD, is that the same as a master's, or is that's not the same as a master's?
It comes after a master's.
Yeah, it's after.
So you do a degree, you do a master's, then you do a doctorate.
Exactly.
So do you have to have a master's to do a doctorate?
I think if you're early in your academic career, yes, one is seen as a stepping stone to the other. But if you come to it later, no, I'm not sure it's a prerequisite.
Okay.
My father-in-law is an academic, and his joke is you got BS, MS, PhD, and it's bullshit, more shit, piled higher and deeper.
It's great. There's the pyramid. It sounds to me like someone's thinking about a PhD down here.
What, me?
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. No? I can't even get work, no matter fucking degree. No, I have been thinking about education because I do like a bit of learning, but I think, well, I don't know, maybe my age would be a bonus. Maybe I'd be able to like sidestep a bunch of the stuff I haven't done, which is almost all of it. but I was chatting to a friend who's doing a ceramics masters, which just sounds amazing. She was describing it to me, and it was about sort of exploring the way that you think and process creatively. I mean, it's just fucking brilliant. And I was like, I was so enamored with the process that she described. And for anybody who's interested, it's Mary Stevens Ceramics. That's Stevens with a PH. Do you know what? I'm going to find the web address because I really love her work. Sorry. MaryStevensCeramics.co.uk. Big fan. Anyway, but the description, and I like the learning process. And obviously, I've got way too much free time. So, again, sleep's overrated. Yeah, I mean, I am fascinated by it all, but it's probably never going to happen. Probably go to my grave underqualified.
But it must be hard to pick, like, because it's not just like, I'm going to go do a PhD. You've got to create your proposal, and the proposal has to get to. So there's a whole like run-up period before you even get to the start line, right?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of preparation in terms of you've got to have a subject, you have a hypothesis, you've got to show exactly what your research is, what it's going to contribute. So yes, and it's also, I mean, oddly enough, it's quite a competitive space because you're competing against other people who would want to do a PhD. But that's a little bit where the difference is. If you're coming with life experience, you tend to have more solid, maybe more concrete ideas of what it is you want to look at. But maybe you don't have the theoretical grounding that then the younger kids have who are doing a master's. It's a bit of a swings and roundabouts, I guess.
Yeah, interesting.
I'm fascinated by the whole thing. Maybe one day, if I ever retire.
I agree. I have so much respect for anybody who's done it. It's such a tough thing to do.
Yeah, yes. Brilliant.
Very
but also, but I love, like, in the example of the friend that I just mentioned, I love that she's got to this age and she's been doing this thing for decades, but she's just thought, do you know what? I can do this better. I want to be better at doing this. And like, I think that's a wonderful thing. It's a really commendable attitude.
Yeah, I agree. Which probably makes it easier as well. If you have to be passionate about whatever it is your topic is.
Yes. Oh my
Yeah.
God. You have to be super passionate about what your topic is. In those dark days, something needs to keep you going.
So you were waking up in the night before you did your PhD, and you were like, "Oh fuck it, I just can't get international relations off my mind. It's keeping me awake at night." Not like me and the
Yes.
cat. The cat was keeping me awake. But okay. But anyway, sorry to rattle on at the end there. Alan, thank you so much for joining us. Very much appreciate it, and I enjoyed listening.
Thanks, Alan.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Gambling Files podcast, please find us on LinkedIn. Give us a big, juicy, succulent like. That nearly went wrong. You can find us under the name The Gambling Files Podcast. You can find us on Twitter under The Gambling Files. I think the handle is just @Gambling Files. You can connect to myself, John Bruford, or Fintan Costello, also on LinkedIn. We're also both on Twitter. And you can find all of our previous episodes at www.thegamblingfiles.com. If you enjoyed it, please share, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues, and we'll see you next time.